Harvey Rosenthal, CEO of NIAPRS, New York Association of Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services. We're a statewide partnership, people in recovery, people who provide services, and a lot of people in recovery who provide services. Our mission is to improve services and social conditions and policies by advancing the values and practices of recovery, rehabilitation, rights, community inclusion, cultural competence, and perfectly for this topic, cultural competence and criminal justice reform. In that spirit, we have been, I don't know how to say it, heartfelt, committed, strong supporters of this campaign and of these wonderful people for a number of months now, years, I should say. And the purpose of today's webinar is a couple of purposes. You know, if you're in the recovery movement, the peer movement, if you're in the NIAPRS family, you know that personal stories are at the heart of who we are and what we do. That's where we start. We tell our story. And so our hope today is to both hear from these extraordinary people, hear their story, particularly as it regards the criminal justice system and race, solitary confinement, and then the campaign itself and where the campaign is and what we can do after this webinar to support the enactment of the HALT bill. But we'll be able to tell you more about that in a minute. I first want to introduce our speakers. We have some extraordinary members of the campaign. And so, Jerome, if you would maybe start by saying what the campaign is and then going into your story a little bit.
Sure, first of all, and thank you. I see we have a number of people on. I really appreciate you showing up at this on this Friday afternoon. You could be doing a whole lot of other things, so really appreciate that. So as he said, my name is Jerome Wright, and I am one of the statewide organizers for the Campaign for Alternatives to Isolated Confinement. This is a campaign that's made up of a collaboration of groups, organizations, and people who are supportive of the HALT Solitary Confinement Act. The HALT Solitary Confinement Act, in its basis terms, is the first step towards ending the paradigm of punishment and torture known as solitary confinement in the jails and prisons in New York State. And we do this by imposing upon them an immediate limit on the amount of time anybody can spend in solitary confinement. And that limit is 15 days in conjunction with the UN General Assembly and what is affectionately known as the Mandela Rules, which states that no person in any confinement should be held more than 15 days, after which it would be considered torture. So we will routinely and daily torturing and abusing the citizens of this state for weeks, months, years, and in some cases even decades. And the HALT Solitary Confinement Act is the bill that would codify the fact that nobody could be placed in that situation. And it also is very instrumental in the fact that it would exclude several groups from ever having to be placed in solitary. Groups like pregnant women and women nursing or postpartum, children, really, all those under the age of 21 whose brains haven't developed yet to even understand the consequences of their actions in some respect. People with mental health issues, and that is where NIAPRS has been our staunchest supporter and the biggest example of people with lived experience who can live valuable lives as long as they're not tortured and traumatized by solitary confinement. And Harvey and NIAPRS, you guys have been humongous in giving anecdotal information about it, but showing that we're no different than anybody else because of our experience, but we would be different if we allow solitary to continue to impact negatively the members of this state, both men, women, children, and all other gender non-conforming people, which is another thing that we would do. We would stop them from using solitary for COVID, isolation and medical quarantine. Would stop them from using it to silence advocates inside the prison. It would stop it from doing a whole lot of things that currently it doesn't do. But the biggest thing is the people who do have problems adjusting would be getting the help that heretofore they would not have gotten. And that is programming, therapy, treatment, and being able to deal with the issues that brought them to prison in the first place, or had them, while they're in prison, arrive in a segregated confinement situation.
Thank you, Jerome. That's a great start. Natasha, you want to introduce yourself? I mean, we'll go around and ask for more personal stories, but right now it's more of an intro for our attendees.
So good afternoon. Thank you for attending this webinar. I'm Natasha, a previously incarcerated survivor of Holt solitary confinement and also community organizer for Holt. And I am here to answer questions and bring awareness to what happens to people while in solitary, after in solitary, and what happens to their family members once they are released. I just want to thank you for being on this platform with us. And when it is my turn, I have no problem telling you my story.
I know that, Natasha. Thank you. Scott, you want to just introduce yourself and just an opening comment? We'll get back to the campaign itself and its history and what's happening now and next steps. You'll be the best person for that in particular, but do you want to just say hi a little bit?
Hey everybody, thanks so much, Harvey. Love you and love Niapolis, and so glad to be here with Jerome and Natasha and everybody. My name is Scott Paltrowitz. I'm a organizer, an advocate, and activist around incarceration issues in New York State. Spent a number of years investigating human rights abuses inside of New York's prisons, and then have been part of various campaigns to release people, bring people home, and have been part of the Halt Solitary campaign since it started in 2012. So excited to be here and excited to talk to you all about it.
So as I said before, we'll learn more about the campaign and we'll learn more about the details of the Halt bill. But as I said, recovery movement, peer movement, Niapolis is all about stories, our personal story. And we tell our stories really all the time. And so I'm going to ask Jerome, if you would start and just tell your personal story, like what, and both about racism and then the interface with the criminal justice system and then solitary itself and then wherever you want to go from there, please.
Okay, thank you. I definitely appreciate this informal format where I can really riff what's on my mind and my heart, because I think that a lot of people won't understand solitary, don't really understand what goes on. And it doesn't start with solitary. Solitary is where it ends up. So for my story, in all transparency, I am a formerly incarcerated person who spent 30 plus years incarcerated in very maximum and medium facilities in the state of New York. And during that 30 years, I spent about 7.5 years in solitary confinement. That left an indelible imprint on my life, on my family. But I want to talk about why I went to prison. I went to prison as a young man at the age of 18 for a murder that I did commit. And I apologize to all of you on here for my actions. And they're not just the indiscriminate actions of a young man, of a youth. I'm not using that as an excuse. But I come from a community that had been maligned, and I thought everything was all right until I woke up and found out that there's a lot of racism that's involved in. I mean, I went to Catholic school my entire life. I was on the Dean's Roll, the honors list. I was in college when I got arrested. I had every available opportunity to go the right way, but there are sometimes forces beyond your understanding that push you in directions that you don't even know you don't want to go. And some of the institutional and structural racism in my community made it appealing to me to be involved in criminal activity, because I saw that as a way of getting the American dream. Because the people that I saw that looked like me, who worked hard every day, were not living the American dream. They were living the dream of the working poor. And I didn't want to be one of them, but I chose the wrong route to go, and I killed a drug dealer in a robbery. I spent the time in prison, and during that time, I learned that the system is not broken, that actually the system is working the way it was designed to work. And that is as an extension of slavery and as a way to repress, oppress, and subjugate Black, Brown, and Latinx bodies. and poor white people. Because I'm gonna tell you now, you may think because of the color of your skin that you all right, but if you were poor and you're not in with the in crowd, they don't care about you either. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn. And while incarcerated, I learned that lesson well by reading and studying. And what it led me to believe is that the way to change things is to have people learn what's wrong. And what's wrong is that we have a carceral system that has its whole flourishment on the backs of Black and brown people. And we need to end that. We need to dismantle that. We need to bring back rehabilitation. What we really need to do is bring back a sense of community with each other and stop these racist and these divisive tactics that some of our leaders have even begun to engage in, that cause people to look at other people as less than or better than, and we know in this case, none of that is true. And I don't want to digress, but I want to tell you that I didn't need to go to prison, but there was a trajectory set up. There is a thing that we know in our community as the school to prison pipeline. There's no mistake that young boys, especially young Black boys around the age of 9, start to get turned off to school and get turned on to the streets. It's part of a greater plan. It's part of a system that looks at the carceral system as a way to employ rural white people to give livelihoods to communities in rural areas who would be decimated, would be welfare infested if they didn't have prisons there. And it is a way to continue the paradigm in this country of subjugating of Black and brown bodies. And until we want to talk honestly and openly about that, then we won't move forward. And I think that in this discussion here, we hope to honestly and openly talk about a number of things that are facing us as a human species, but more so as a community who wants to be safe and who deserves to have respect and dignity for all its members.
Jerome, I love you. I don't know how else to say it. You're such a powerful speaker and your story is so clear. And you've certainly made one of the connections today about racism and incarceration. Could you talk a little bit about how you got into solitary and what that experience was like and how that caused you to become the advocate that you are?
Sure. First, I'll tell you that I went to solitary several times because I did violate laws. I was never incorrigible, and I hate when we use that word because I don't think any human being is incorrigible. Everything that we know, we learn. So everything we learn, we can unlearn and learn something better. So how you could consider somebody incorrigible, I do not know. If somebody's a sociopath or a psychopath, they need help and treatment, not jail and solitary. That's what I'm saying. So how I got in there, well, sometimes it was for breaking rules, but the time that I spent the most in solitary consecutively, 2.5 years, was for advocating against racial discrimination in the prison system. A lawsuit, Santiago versus Miles, I was a plaintiff in that lawsuit that showed that an Elmira Correctional Facility staff repeatedly used the N-word, abused Black and brown and Latin people, gave us more time in disciplinary actions. They lived in the best housing blocks. They were white jobs and Black jobs in prison. And I went to testify against that and was assaulted by staff for testifying because they said I was snitching on their fellow officers, beaten almost to death, and then given 7 years SHU time. And the only reason why I only did 2.5 years is because during the investigation, it was found out that we didn't assault anybody, that we were assaulted and protected ourselves. And officers were sanctioned and fired because of their assaults on us. But I was really put in to silence me, to shut me up, and to show all my peers that if you take this type of stance, this is what will happen to you. And they use solitary often as a way to dissuade, discourage, and frighten people from standing up for what is right for everybody. And I was one of those people who was, after that, summarily put in solitary anytime I was on the liaison committee, the grievance committee, or advocating for myself or my peers in prison because of the way that they treated us that was illegal, but because it's not done where we have cell phones and access to videotaping and showing people, that people did not believe or listen to. Now, having seen George Ford and Breonna Taylor and all those others, if you think they're doing that to people in the street, you can only imagine what they do to us behind those walls.
So speaking of that, just to go a little deeper, so could you just talk about your first, I mean, this campaign has been just brought me unimaginable horror and anger and fear as I've listened to all of this, but I've never, and I've seen pictures of the box and I work hard to get people out of them, but I don't know what it's like to actually be brought to your first day there, what happens in there, how you wind up staying there, how you're there for years instead of, months. Could you talk about that?
Yes, yes. And I want to, I know that Natasha has a particular story that she tells that I want to leave that for her, but I do want to tell you this. When we talk about solitary, we talk about that cell and the amount of time you spend in it and the amount of time you could be in there. Nobody talks about solitary as a process. If they come and get you with 7, 8 officers and a sergeant, and they handcuffed you and they got their batons out and they're itching for you to make a move so they can break you up. They yell at you, they scream at you, they push you, they put the cuffs on too tight. Your hands are swelling up. You're in a state of total fear because you're immobilized and can't do anything. They smack you, they punch you, they kick you, they hit you. And this is not hyperbole, and I am not exaggerating. I have been assaulted in cuffs behind my back, kicked in my thighs, thrown on the floor, thrown down steps to go to the unit. And that's just to get there. That's not talking about once you get in the physical unit and you hear the cacophonous sounds of noise, banging, screaming, hollering. And I will play some of that for you so that you can see before we over. I will play the soundtrack so people can see, because they think solitary is this nirvana place like a monastery where everybody's sitting there going woosah and no, it is people losing their collective minds, screaming to be identified as human, lashing out at themselves and others. And that's, like I said, before you even get in the cell, they take you and they strip you naked in front of these guards who have their batons out and they're swinging them in their hands and they're saying, go for it, do it, you move, don't do that. And they tell you, move this hand, you move that way. And they say, you move too slow, too fast, and push you in there. It's a terroristic approach to getting you just to the cell. And they stand there naked and they're asking you questions while you're standing there naked. Ask me the questions after you gave me my clothes. But it is to humiliate you. It is to dehumanize you. It is to threaten and torture you. And that's before you even get to the cell. When you get to the cell, that's a whole nother thing. When that door closes behind you and you realize you in there and you don't know when the hell you're coming out, you don't know any of the rules. They don't give you a rule book for the box. You don't know that you got to get up in the morning and be standing on your gate to get your meal, because that first day you there, you miss breakfast because you get up late and you don't know that. And then they come by and they tell you you didn't put down for a shower. You weren't standing on the gate to put down for rec. And you don't have any clothing but the suit that they gave you and underwear, and it's freezing in it because they got all the windows open because they got guys in glass cells who they got restrictions on. I mean, it is just like, I don't even think that, people look at movies, you cannot dramatize this. This is something that only you can live to understand, and I don't want anybody else to live this. And that's why Passing Halt has been a labor of love for me. Before I became a paid organizer, I was a volunteer because I had pledged with my last breath that I was going to dismantle the system that helped destroy the lives of so many people I care about and love, and for my people who have been racially profiled to be there.
I'm just going to put this phone down. I apologize. Jerome, you just really, I was hoping you would make it that clear and that strong and draw the connection with race. And it's just so painful, but so powerful. And I so appreciate what you're offering us, this experience. Natasha, would you also do the same? You've had so much, I've heard you say so much about your experience, also with your husband and your family. Could you tell your story about what led up to you being incarcerated and the experience of it, the impact on your family?
I come from a long line of incarceration. My father is currently incarcerated in federal prison. He has life plus 300 years. He's been in about 26 years, 27. My husband did 20 years. I did juvenile time from the age of 13 to 17, and then from the age of 28 to 40, back and forth, basically due to drug addiction. I went to jail basically due to drug addiction. The majority of my crimes were committed while I was on drugs. My first state bid, I went to jail for being in a car with a drug dealer. He put his drugs under my seat. They didn't care that when they pulled us out the car, he had all the money and I had paraphernalia. He got bailed out and offered a program. I was offered time because I had a violent history. I am a survivor and I'm a recovering addict, a survivor of solitary, survivor of domestic abuse, survivor of the system. Unfortunately, I didn't grow up poor because my mom had full custody of me from birth. There was no support for me on that end. She didn't know how to deal with that. Her and my father separated as soon as she got pregnant because she was 14. So my mother's family, it had a big influence in my life where they didn't know anything about the streets. However, I gravitated toward the street anyway. So once I got out there, I was out there. That was it. When I tell my story, even though I've been in solitary confinement, by the grace of God, it did not affect me the way many have been affected, because all I cared about was being able to rest. I ran the streets for so long that there were days while I was in prison that I thanked God for my bed. But my husband went to prison at 17 years old, and from Rikers Island straight to SHU because of his gang affiliation. He's a 17-year-old gang member. How much stuff could he possibly have done for you to isolate him for 12 years straight at 17? So even though he's a walking Google and a genius, he has no self-control. Like, that mature growth that we need as humans is not there. You would not know from talking to him, but get him upset and it's a whole different story. And you don't see that until you're in a situation that he feels like he's caged. So what ended up happening was, when you get over the physical aspect of being able to be with somebody you love, and all the gentleness and the sensuality is gone and there is friction, you see the damage. He was in an accident at work. When he came home from jail, he came off running, straight internship at Bloomberg, because he's very smart. So even then, I didn't see it. Like, we didn't argue much because I was just happy to be with my man. So it was like, I'm playing house and he's working and we good. Until he got into an accident at work and he ended up in a wheelchair. From day one, that wheelchair was like a cell for him. And I was the only one there. Like, I bathed him the whole time he was in ICU. The nurses never had to touch him. I slept at the hospital and then went to work. And then when he came home, that first day home was the flag. Boom, we're arguing in the furniture store. He rolls off. Oh, because I'm in a wheelchair, you think I can't go nowhere? Just going crazy in the middle of the Bronx. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? It didn't dawn on me that this was the damage of solitary confinement. you know, we've had odds and odds and ends, where you have normal disagreements as a married couple, but never to the point where he's in the street calling me bitches and all type of craziness because he can't control himself. Never to that extent until now. So a couple of weeks go on, and now he's able to move around. And finally, I just got so frustrated one day during an argument that I was like, you know what? You can walk, you can feed yourself right now. His sister had came down from DC. She was at the house. I said, I'm out of here. I went to walk out that door, and the next thing I know, there was a gun in my face. And we were fighting and he breaking everything. And I'm talking about somebody that could barely walk. So imagine at his full strength, what could have happened in my home. But what I realized is once it goes to that level, it never goes back. Once that respect is gone and a man puts his hands on you, it doesn't go back from that. However, he ended up getting arrested. I didn't press charges. It was a bunch of nonsense. There was a rally the next day in Albany. I was a part of Just Leadership at the time. And so I went. I was going to go anyway. So I went, and we stayed 2 days, and it was Juneteenth, and Holt was there presenting. They asked us if somebody wanted to talk about solitary confinement, and I volunteered to talk. And I never went home since that day, because that was the day that it dawned on me that the trauma that he went through and the lack of normal development, the lack of self-control could end my life if I went back to him. I stayed in Albany. I never came back. From Albany, I went through domestic violence. And of course, we were back and forth. He came up. And then it would dawn on me that, Natasha, you're putting yourself right back in harm's way. The most hurtful part is that could have been avoided. You locked that baby up and you locked him in. And this is what has come home to me. I pray for him and any woman that loves him, because she's always going to be in harm's way. He is stuck in a teenage gangbanger's body, mind frame.
And Natasha, you see that as this damage and the aggression and the way he comes is because of in some part because of the experience of having been in solitary.
Yeah, like sometimes he talks to me and I'll be like, or I'll see a look on his face and I'll be like, what's going on? And he'd be like, I'm playing chess. You're playing chess with who? He's playing chess in his head. So everything is, has to be planned. Don't let the train not be running. It's the end of the world. Instead of him asking me, Ma, can you find me another train station on Google? It's all my fault. Bitch, it's your fault. Excuse me, but I have to be honest. It's just go straight to the left. It's the end of the world because the lack of maturity is not there. And anything that is not supposed to happen that day, if it does happen to happen, he's got to figure it out. Like, it really, 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 really damaged him. And the worst part about it is he won't admit it. See, once you realize this is what happened to me, this is how it affected me. Now, what can I do to help myself? You're stuck. And whoever's with you is stuck right with you.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, it angers me, but I'm hurt severely. This is my man. You know what I mean? This is my love. That is over. It's gone. I'm 45 years old. I waited all these years for this man to come home. I don't have no children. I don't own a home that I come in the house and am ready to run a bath and light some candles because I don't have a man to do that for. So now I'm here, there, and everywhere. By the grace of God, I believe Holt Solitary saved my life. But now my life is dedicated to Holt Solitary. When is that going to be over? When are they going to pass this bill and we move on to the next so that when I fly off somewhere, I ain't got to get back on the plane to run somewhere else? Because people know this is wrong. So be done with it. It's 2021. We getting it done.
I hear that. Looks like that's really going to happen. We'll talk more about that in a little bit.
Thank God.
Thank you so much for your stories, both of you. I'm so powerful. Can you talk about how your experience, what was your first experience with the campaign? How did you hear about it?
Oh,
Uh,
so my first experience was that day at Juneteenth. So they
Okay.
interviewed me, and it was crazy because I started crying and everything. The next day, my face is on newspaper with somebody along with vocal, and I see all this Holt Solitary behind me. And mind you, the very same people that I advocate with now were there, but we don't know each other by names. But now we're co-workers, and that was my first experience. And that's when I realized that ever since then, like I would run into Claire or somebody from Holt at other rallies, and then they sent out the information to looking for organizers, and I got offered other full-time positions. I was like, nope, I'm going to Holt. That's where I belong. That's my team. How the kids do it?
Well, I think, the experience of whatever we want to call that leads us into recovery, shapes our lives. And many of us become advocates and fighters and peer supporters because of that experience.
Absolutely.
Jerome, what was your first experience with the campaign? How did you even hear about it, and how did you
Yeah,
get involved, and what was that like?
so I was I got out of prison in 2009, and so I didn't know nothing about it right away. I was trying to immerse myself in the community and show that I had changed, and what I wanted my life to be like, and to do the right things, and to get in, like John Lewis said, start getting in some good trouble. So I started doing that. And I was working as a teacher and a mentor at a charter school in Rochester. And Hart was doing an advocacy day in Albany. And I had been volunteering with the campaign here and there. And I got the school to approve letting about 30 of the students go on the trip to charter a bus and take them down to Albany. And we did that. And I'm telling you, it was one of the highlights of my life. Those kids, they comported themselves so well. They learned so much. They came back feeling like they were little lobbyists, and it really was empowering to them, and it changed their minds about a lot of things that previously they didn't care about politics. They didn't think about it. They just thought they hated everything and everybody. And out of that experience came a lot of growth. And after that experience, that day, I was like, man, I was torn because I loved working with those kids, but I knew that I had a story to tell and I had a place in that campaign. And I started volunteering more. And then finally they got a grant for organizer upstate. They wanted to expand the parameters because it was at that point pretty centralized in New York City, because of the great liberal groups that we have down here. And, Scott and JJ and all of them being such great organizers, they had already got all these people. So there was a process where I applied for the job. It was about 20 some of us, and I applied, and they hired me. And when they hired me, I took that as a sign that, I'm gonna tell you, I'm a Christian man, I'm a God-fearing man, and I do believe that He directs your steps, and when you're doing right, He will definitely direct your steps. And He brought me to a campaign that had a 1-year grant. And I've been working for the campaign for 4 years now. And then we just got to this point. So it shows me that this was divinely inspired and this is where I was meant to be. And I'm glad I heeded that call, because I definitely wanted to stay with them young people, but there was a tug. And then meeting Scott and Jake, meeting that team, it was just, you could not say no to them, and you could not do anything, but because most of them did not have lived experience, and their hearts, their time, their money, everything was poured into this. And when I told my friends about it, they were like, there's not no white people doing this for us. And I had to show them. And I've been there ever since. And I will be there, not even after Hall is passed and we get implemented. We are locked as a family forever and a day, as we are with you too, Harvey.
Yes, sir. Scott, could you talk about the campaign, how it started? I mean, maybe talk a little bit about your background in rights advocacy and how that led you to this particular campaign, and just the background. I think the campaign is 8 years old. Am I right?
Campaign is around since 2012, so I guess it's about a little over 9 years old.
Okay.
We've been pushing the halt solitary bill. This will be the 8th legislative session that we've been pushing for its passage. But I got involved in the campaign because I've seen the horrors of what happens behind prison walls in New York State. And, you know, our incarceration system is a racist system. It's a punitive system. It's a barbaric system. It's a horrific system. And to be honest, the whole thing needs to be dismantled, in my opinion, and abolished. Um, and one of the, most horrific aspects of it, and one that epitomizes kind of the racist nature of it and the punishment paradigm of it, is solitary confinement. The fact that you could put a human being, and it's almost all Black and brown human beings, though people of all colors are put in solitary, but over 80% are Black or brown people. You could put a human being in a box for not only days at a time, which is horrific in and of itself, but weeks and months and years and even over 30 years. There's no way for me to understand that system other than understanding it as a tool of racist oppression and dehumanization, and it's intended to break people and harm communities. So, for me, getting involved in the campaign was a way to, first of all, stop these human rights atrocities and, try to bring some relief to the people who are enduring this torture. And it's a window into the entire incarceration system, and it's a way to connect with people and to show them that this whole system is not about safety. It's not. It's about, racist oppression, and that's really what it's about. So that's how I got involved in the campaign. And the campaign's been around since, 2012 is when it started. There's been people who've been doing work on solitary confinement issues for decades in New York, people both behind the walls and people on the outside. But we built off of that legacy as a campaign. We've stood on the shoulders of so many before us. And we, formed a coalition of people who'd come home from prison, people who have loved ones inside, people in the mental health community like NIAPRIS, people in the faith community, advocates, lawyers, civil rights organizations, human rights organizations, and we came together with the focus of ending the torture of solitary confinement and then using that as a window to challenge the whole system. And so we've been fighting now since 2012. In 2014, we introduced legislation called the Halt Solitary Confinement Act. It was a bill that we collectively drafted. People, again, who come home from prison, we engage with people who were in solitary at the time. That's how we, work to create this bill, to know what, there's people who have worked in mental health, people who've worked as correction officers who were part of this process. So we, this was a real bill that was created by the people and for the people, and that was its intention. And we said we want to create what we want to see. And at the time, people in the legislature, many of them said this will never happen. It's never going to be the case, that this is too far out there. It's too much of a transformational change. And we said, but this is what needs to happen. And to be honest, now 8 years later, we say we need to even go further. We need to abolish solitary altogether. But we've also now proven, and it's been in the chat, but just this week, the Assembly and the Senate in New York State passed the Halt Solitary Confinement Act with super majorities in both houses of the legislature. And it's a testament to this campaign that people all across the state, and I should have mentioned this before, primarily we were a campaign about raising awareness, raising consciousness, organizing people. We would do events. We had plays, Mariposa and the Saint. We did film screenings. We had, panels with people like Jerome and Natasha leading the way. We did street actions. So this has been a campaign over many years to try to connect with people, educate people, mobilize people, organize people, and then ultimately all together push for this kind of change.
And that's important to say, for those of you who are, I know NIAPRA's involvement in this issue came with a law that was proposed called the shoe exclusion law. And the shoe is another name for the box. And this was a campaign, I want to say, Scott, is it 2008, 9?
That's when the bill was passed, was 2008, but the campaign started in the early 2000s, Harvey.
Did it? I can't remember.
So it's been, 20, almost 20 years that people have been fighting for that.
It was an extraordinary campaign. It was called Boot the Shoe for the Special Housing Unit. And it was like this campaign, a relentless campaign, and one that eventually, I remember that the bill was locked up in the Senate, and the Senate leaders who were blocking it lied about it and told us that it was, somebody else was stopping it. And we were able to go above them and get the leadership to put the bill on the floor and to get it passed. Scott, could you say a little bit about what progress the shoe bill made and what progress the HALT bill is going to make on top of that?
Sure. So the shoe exclusion law basically said that people who have what is defined in the law as quote unquote serious mental illness had to be diverted from a shoe to a more mental health oriented unit. It's still a disciplinary unit, but people would have access to out of cell time and congregate programming and engagement with mental health staff. And so it was a really important change that happened because people were being locked away for years and decades, people who had, severe mental health challenges and were being, ultimately tortured by the system. And so it did have some positive changes to bring some relief to people. And the department, tried to implement it in a way that, made it less beneficial than it could or should have been. So it didn't even achieve as much as it could because the department tried to change diagnoses so that people wouldn't get the benefits of it. They try to make these units as punitive as possible.
Scott, just to interrupt.
Yes.
You would get an alternative to the box if you had what we call an Axis 1 diagnosis, a more major diagnosis. And what happened was people got diagnosed down from that to a lesser diagnosis, so they could be put in the box. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so, I think a lot of the people who were involved initially with the Halt Solitary campaign had been involved in that campaign. And that bill, again, it was passed in 2008, but it didn't go into effect until 2011. So there were a lot of lessons learned, from that fight and from that bill. But ultimately, people said, yes, this is great that we helped provide some relief to this category of people who are being, absolutely tortured. And this is torture for everybody, and we have to stop this. First of all, there's many people who have diagnosed mental illness who are still placed in the box, every day. But beyond that, somebody goes in, even if they don't have a mental health need that's diagnosed, this still causes devastating mental health harm, physical harm, spiritual harm, emotional harm, social harm, and it's torture. And so, what we are trying to do is to go much farther than that, to say what the bill says is nobody can be in solitary for more than 15 consecutive days. And that's what the Special Rapporteur on Torture had called for. And some categories of people, including people who have mental health needs, can't spend even one day in solitary. And then the other things that the bill does is it says people could still be separated from the general prison population if there's, a significant and real issue, either for their own safety or for other people's safety. But that separation can't be isolation. It can't be this torture. It has to be an engagement, an intervention that can be more effective. So people have to have at least 7 hours at a cell per day. They have to have programming with other people. They have to have, engagement that can aim to address the reasons why they might be separated, not locked in a box that's going to worsen whatever issues they were facing. And so that's, what the bill tries to do. It tries to shift, again, this punishment paradigm to say if somebody, again, like Jerome said, people aren't sent to solitary usually because they've done, not, I shouldn't say usually, sometimes they're not sent for doing, breaking a rule or doing something wrong or acting in a violent manner. Most of the time it's for a nonviolent rule violation. And for many times, it's as a way to prevent people from doing their own advocacy for other people, as retaliation for people who raise complaints, as a cover up for officers who've beaten people up. But even in a case where there is a real, violent act, for instance, what should that response to that be? Should it be isolation and torture that's going to make it more likely for someone to act in a violent manner? Or should it be engagement and opportunities for programming to address why, somebody may have acted the way they did?
You mentioned that the bill restricts the amount of consecutive time you could be in the box for 15 days. You said earlier, one of you, I think Jerome, that you can be in the box for years, which is just unthinkable to me. Can you explain how you wind up with maybe a small sentence in the box and you're there for years, such that the law had to stop that? What happens there? I myself have not really heard the whole story about how you go in for a small amount of time and you're there for years. What's the mechanics?
Let me give you an example, and I wish I could play, if I was technologically savvy enough, I could play the video.
Yeah.
I interviewed a guy who I did not know, but we were handing out flyers in Westchester County, me and Fran, to come to a rally. And I handed out a flyer to a guy. He said, "Oh man, yeah, they got to stop this SHU." I said, "Why?" He said, "I've been there. It was the worst thing in my life." So I asked him, "Can I interview him?" And in the interview, he told me he went to the box for having a fight, not even a physical argument that they pushed each other, officers separated, took him to the box. He went to the box and he didn't have anything, only the clothes that they give you. They hadn't given him a blanket, nothing yet, and it was cold. And he kept asking for it and nobody got anything for him. What he did was he cut a hole in his mattress so that he could get in there like a sleeping bag in order to be warm. The morning shift comes on and sees him in that, and they write him up for destroying the property, for all these other charges. And he came in with a fight that wasn't a fight, got into a cell that was freezing. He had nothing to keep him warm and protect himself, humiliated himself by getting into a bag, his mattress, and then gets on top of that 180 days for cutting into the thing. So now what happens? He's livid. You're going to give me all that. So now he becomes what they're going to say incorrigible. He's throwing stuff at them because now you gave me I'm in here for 180, 200 days for nothing. So now I'm going to give you a reason for keeping me here. And now he gets ticket after ticket after ticket. And all they do is push his release date back and back and back.
How would you get a ticket if you're already in the box during the 6-month period?
Because
what are you doing so that they come in and they say, "Oh yeah, well, here's more
That's
time."
when you get the most tickets.
When you're already in the box, not even when you're out in the general population.
You get more tickets in the box than in general for anything.
Could you say more about how that happens?
If you're banging on your door, you want something, you're causing a disturbance. If you try to go to sick call and you miss the call and you bang on the door, wait, say the nurse walks right past. Wait, you're causing a disturbance. Any little thing can get you, and the days start at what, 30? Like it's automatic 30 when you go to the hearing. Automatic extra 30. It don't start with 15 days or loss of rec because you're already in SHU.
Yo, you wasn't on the gate when they called you for rec. Man, that's some bullshit. You cursed out an officer that's right. 60, 80 days. Yo, you're trying to get toothpaste because you out. You throw something, your sheet out to the guy and he tried to send you his. That's you and him now getting tickets for kiting, sheeting. Oh, what you telling me? You're yelling on the gate, yo, help. You're causing the disturbance. Help. You're yelling help, not cursing people out. I told you to be quiet. We'll be back there when we get ready. You keep yelling, I'm gonna write you up. Don't even yell no more, and then still get a ticket. So get a ticket. They give out tickets like they give out Tic Tac at a bad breath convention.
Sorry, Jerome, I had to laugh at that one. That's too powerful. Scott, could you talk about suicides in the box? I mean, it's something that certainly relates to our community, and there's a number of statistics about it. Could you say more about that?
Yeah, as I, said before, solitary has been known for decades, if not, over a century, to cause devastating mental health harm to people, whether they had mental health needs before they went in or out. And one of the most common, impacts of solitary, one of the most well-known impacts is that people harm themselves when they're inside. Self-mutilation is devastating. People, also, I won't say that now to not, the specifics for people on. I don't want to, trigger anybody, but any kind of manner that you could think about how people might try to harm themselves, that's what happens inside of the box, because people, are just deteriorating and decompensating so significantly. And, in New York State prisons, every other day, not just in solitary, but every other day in the prison, someone attempts suicide. Every other day, at least one person attempts suicide. It's just awful. That's what our prison system does to people in general. And vastly disproportionately, it happens in solitary. It's about 12 times higher. Those attempted suicides happen inside of solitary units. And suicides themselves, unfortunately, tragically, happen far too often, and people are, take their own lives. I shouldn't even say take their own lives. The system has taken their lives, but they have died by suicide because of solitary. And about a third of all suicides in the prisons happen inside solitary confinement units. So it's devastating. This is a practice that we know, causes devastating harm and immense suffering, and it's a practice that kills people. It literally kills people. So, it has to end. It has no place in New York. We hopefully will get this HALT bill signed by the governor. And I know we only have a few minutes left, so I want to just plug, if I
I think
can.
we're going to one. I think we go to 115, Len. No.
Oh, okay. Never mind. I'll come back to it then. But
We're going to go to 115 anyway, no matter what. Let's
okay,
do it.
we'll get this passed by get it signed by the governor, but then we also have to keep going because we need to end this torture altogether. Solitary needs to be abolished. And we have to challenge this whole incarceration system. We need to, get other bills and legislation passed to decarcerate our state and to change what's happening.
Harvey, can I jump
Sure.
in just say something
You bet.
particular to NIASPRA's affiliates? And I think that this is particularly, one of the reasons why it's a particularly poignant moment for me is that the bill codifies not people with diagnosed mental health not getting in there. The sad part is that the system does a terrible job of finding out the trauma that's visited on people and finding out whether they have any issues or not. A lot of people never find out they have any mental health issues until they have an episode. And if that episode happens as a result of solitary, there's no help right there. The steep decline is steeper. And I know that we know that everybody at some point in their life, as long as they're human, has a mental health issue at some point, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, whatever it is, at some point. The problem with some of us is that those things last longer for us than others, but everybody has. And prison is trauma in and of itself. We keep trying to act like prisons are these all right places and that solitary is just the worst part of it. Prison is a mental health inducing incubator in and of itself. So I just think that we need to deal with this system because it does nothing but increase the numbers of people with lived experience from some form of mental health issue, because that's what it does.
Thank you, Jerome.
Jerome saying. Also, a lot of us have diagnoses that were developed through the traumas that we endure in life. So, whereas I may have not had a mental illness as a child, but by the time I went through the traumas of drug addiction, domestic abuse, or just literally fighting outside in the street. I mean, it's clear as day I was a fighter. So I now have intermittent explosive disorder. Combine that with somebody who doesn't have self-control, and you got a ticking bomb right there. Like a person can't even yell at me without me having to really figure it out. Like, do you go off now or what? You know what I'm saying? So try getting me to solitary. The times that I have been in SHU, like coming to get me is a problem. You need 12 people.
Yeah, I understand.
But imagine after all of that, what you go through once I'm put in the cell and I'm by myself. And I've been to the point where I can be totally honest. I have been so angry at times that I have peed on myself. So, and then have to sit there for 2 days before they bring me tissue or anything. Can't take my clothes off because it's freezing.
Right.
A little bit of clothes I do got on.
That's why you say torture, treatment
Right.
rather than torture.
It's like locking your dog in its cage and then getting mad because your house smells like shit. Well, where is he supposed to go to the bathroom if you don't let him out?
Understood.
It's insanity.
So speaking of insanity in mental health, first of all, let me just say, if I mean this sincerely, I could not survive the box. I would try to hurt myself. I could not endure. I don't know how people do it. But if there was mental health treatment for me or others, or for any of you, what kind of mental health treatment is there in the prison? And why is the HALT bill, with its emphasis on rehabilitation, going to turn that around? What has been the mental health treatment? And what do we hope it's going to be?
I would like Scott to talk about the provisions of the bill and why they're important, but I can tell you this about mental health and corrections. It is a joke. And the sad part is the joke is on us, because there is no comprehensive attempt to make sure that anybody gets the best treatment or to get the treatment that they need. Everything is security first, and you cannot have security and therapy conflicting. So getting to see them is almost impossible. When you see them, all they want to do is throw medication at you. And this is not, and I'm not blaming the practitioners because they overwhelm themselves. I'm not going to just say there are a lot of sick people in prison because we have criminalized mental illness. So we got a lot of people with mental illness in prison because they're where they're not supposed to be to begin with. And so you add to that the people who are there who may be supposed to be there because they did something, and now they're suffering trauma because of prison and whatever their life is. So now you done exacerbated the number of people who need services that they couldn't fulfill to begin with. So you really are taking medication or nothing. And that is the gulf between that is so big that so many people die. And let me tell you one other thing about self-harm. We always talk about the murders, the deaths, but I can tell you, I would bet that 7 out of 10 people self-harm for several reasons. One, it's one of the only ways you get out of that cell. If you draw blood, you can get to medical and see somebody and take a walk and feel human and just be out of that cell. The other thing is, sometimes you want to hurt them so bad that the only person there you can hurt is yourself. And that's what some people do. So it is a big thing, self-harm, bigger than we ever know and bigger than ever will be the numbers we could verify, but it is humongous.
I had a webinar last night. Was it last night?
Me?
Yeah. Yesterday with Cardoza high school students. And the same question was broached on, like, what do you think we need to do as far as the system is concerned? And like Jerome has just said, the majority of the people that are incarcerated are people that are severely mentally ill, people that are on drugs, or people that are survivors of violence. So perfect example. The first time I went to SHU, I had just gotten to Albion. We off the draft. We're being housed. I walk past somebody's cube and the girl throws feces on me. So what happens? We fight. She is a paranoid schizophrenic housed in a regular housing unit, and I'm a new quote unquote inmate. Like, that could have totally been prevented. That is extreme. You know what I mean? She has extreme mental illness, and y'all are doing nothing for her. She lives.
So
in a
let me ask you
dorm.
about, I'm just watching this, I'm so sorry, but it goes back to the treatment. So someone like
Yeah.
that, Scott, I mean,
Been in jail.
how will treatment be delivered now
It doesn't. They
in a
have
way that it
put her-
obviously has? Jerome says it's just medication. Natasha's saying it's not available.
not.
What will, when the whole bill's passed and people have needs, how will they be met?
That I can't say, because we can we change the mental health providers in the corrections? Can we control the mental health clinics being reopened in the society so that people with mental illness could get the help they need and stop getting sent to jail for being something they can't control? Because that's what that's about.
Hire Harvey and Niaspris to do the mental health treatment and that.
Oh my God. Oh my
Okay,
God.
Scott, tell them, answer that question, Scott.
I appreciate that, but so Scott, what is the treatment like? You talk about rehab cells. You'd say they're isolated, but they're open. People get out 7 hours, not 30 minutes. Say more about that, please. And then we're going to take some questions, I think.
Sure. I mean, I do have to just echo, like, prison is not a place for people who have mental health needs. We need to stop incarcerating people in prisons and jails entirely. And to be honest, it's not a place for anyone, as I said earlier, but certainly is not a place for people with mental health needs. And I will, be humble and modest to say the HALT bill is not going to change everything inside, right? And it's not going to automatically or somehow magically mean that people are going to get good and proper and appropriate mental health care. I don't think you can deliver appropriate mental health care inside of a prison or a jail, to be honest. What it will do, is it'll stop people who have mental health needs from being in a box for years and decades at a time. It'll make sure that people with mental health needs actually don't spend any time in solitary as it currently is practiced. And it'll mean, like you said, Harvey, that people will have to come out of have access to, nothing in the bill. There's a lot of questions around this in the mental health community that you know more about than me, but there's nothing that mandates anybody to do anything, but there's access to the ability of people to come out of their cell 7 hours a day and have access to programming that's with other people. So what does that mean? It means that they have to be able to be in a room and be able to engage with other people and not be in a box. Even if there was nothing else, let's say mental health wasn't involved in all, that would have a transformational impact on people's mental health and well-being. So I would say that's actually the core. In addition, the bill does require that people have access, people who have mental health needs, that some of that out of cell time is used for mental health programming. And that can be individual treatment and therapy, and it can be group therapy. We'll have to keep fighting to make that as good as possible. And we'll have to keep fighting to make sure people aren't put inside prisons and jails to begin with. But I think those are the ways that the bill, will bring some relief and some, mental health benefits to people inside.
Thank you. So you mentioned, and we're all completely overwhelmed by it. I know I am, that after 8 years, 2/3 of both houses have approved the law. And so where does it go next? And how do we get it done?
Is that for me?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. We're at the moment we've been fighting for the last 8 years. This is what we've been demanding. We've been calling on our legislators to stand with people who've lost their loved ones inside, people who've been inside, to say enough is enough. We can't have torture in our state. And not just a majority, but 2/3 of all the legislators in New York State have said this is torture and it has to end. So we're where we want to be, but we're not fully there. The governor still has to sign this bill into law. And so we need to be pushing as hard as possible. This might be one of the hardest parts of the struggle, that we have to push and make sure that he signs it. Now, we're confident that he will. This is torture and people are suffering and dying in solitary. We have super majorities in both houses, but we can't back down yet. We have to push forward, push hard. And so we need everybody who's on here to do everything you can to help push the governor. I'm going to put in the chat 2 things that you could immediately do to help. One is that this Sunday at 2:00, if you're in Albany or New York City, or you can get to Albany or New York City, we're going to be having actions outside of the governor's mansion in Albany and outside of the governor's office in New York City. And these are going to be, I'm stealing your thunder here, Jerome, parties with a purpose. This is going to be celebratory. We're going to be celebrating our great victory. It's going to be like a dance party. This is not going to be a press conference. This is going to be a dance party because we've achieved what many said was impossible. We've achieved it. But we're doing it with a purpose because we still need the governor to sign that bill. So we're doing it outside of his house and his office. The second thing I'm gonna put in the chat is a link. It's a phone to action tool where it'll help you. If you click that link, you can send an email, send a tweet, and make a phone call to the governor to urge him to sign the HALT legislation. So if everybody can take those actions and anything else that you know of to influence and push to get the governor to sign this bill, that's the moment we're in right now.
I
Scott,
know our mental health groups are going to gather as we have before and support that. I also want to say that Wendy and I are going to be at the mansion on Sunday at 2:00. And we're definitely, I don't know if Jerome, you're going to be there, but I'll be looking for you.
question, Harvey. I also
Yes.
we're having an action on Tuesday. We will be at the church in Buffalo. If anybody is in Rochester, Scott, do you have the photo? I don't know how to upload it. The flyer to them.
I'll try to make a
Or
link
we
for
could
it and
send
put
it
it in
to
the chat.
Niafra separately. If you could get it in the chat, that'd be
I'll
great.
try. Yeah, let me try to see if I can do
Or
that.
Scott, you can send me all the things that are happening and I'll put it out on the e-news.
All right. Thank you so much.
All-
Well, I'll
all
see you
the
on
content.
on Sunday anyway, Harvey, because I'm
Will
coming
you?
home.
I'll be looking for you.
I'm coming home.
And I just want to say, this is the most extraordinary, I've said it a million times, these people are the most extraordinary human beings I've ever met. The passion and the power and the relentlessness, they come from New York City or Buffalo week after week. I've been on a million campaigns. I've never seen people unrelenting, so many strategies, so smart, so strong. And I've never seen a campaign, what Scott said, the bill was written by the campaign. That is the way that campaign operates. Everyone's on the call, everyone has input. It's an extraordinary campaign. Let me see, Len, do you have any questions before we go? We've got 4 minutes.
We've got a couple of questions here, Harvey. One is, how can we get this bill to be nationwide? I guess in Vermont, they're looking and they're working with their legislators on change, but how are we going to be able to take this nationwide? That's one of the questions here.
Okay, I can jump in real quick on that. We are linked with a national campaign called Unlock the Box that has at least, I think, about 22 states right now, ongoing campaigns that are pushing legislation. And so I would be glad to link anybody up in a different state, or got other people in other states who want to do this, to help them get started and to be part of that coalition. So just give me some information and we can get you linked up.
Thank you. Len, what was the other question?
There's another question. Who determines who gets mental health help while in prison? And how do you know which persons need mental health? Is there even help available to folks in prison?
I want to ask one question before that, Scott, or any of you really, which is, the law will prevent people with a mental disability or what have you from getting confined, but how is that defined? How will that be defined?
So it's reference to existing law in New York State around mental and physical disability.
Okay.
And it's a relatively broad definition. The intent is that anybody basically who's considered to have a mental health need would be covered by the bill. Now, as we talked about before with the shoe exclusion law, OMH and docs can manipulate things. So if they don't consider somebody, they take somebody off the mental health caseload, or they say they don't have a diagnosis, there would have to be a push to try to say that they're wrong. But the law itself is meant to be as broad as possible to, cover anybody who has a mental
I
health
remember that Jack Beck with the Correctional Association, when we were a couple of years ago, said, even though because of the shoe exclusion law, people with major diagnoses are not supposed to in the box, there were 900 at that particular time. Right? Do you remember that?
Yes. So even with
Yeah.
the shoe exclusion law, still, and that's on a snapshot on a day, that there's, upwards of 900 people. We don't have current data, but yes, I think it's about the same probably now as it was on the data you're citing. And that means thousands over the course of a year.
Who shouldn't be there because of the shoe exclusion law, but have been.
Well, shouldn't be there because they have a mental health need, but because of how the shoe exclusion law, focused on a particular subset of folks, and because the department under diagnoses people that are there.
The meeting, yeah. Len, any more questions?
Well, just the question in the chat box is how do you differentiate? They're assuming that anyone who goes to prison, as you said, it's a place of torture. It's anybody in there would need some kind of mental health help. And so how do you differentiate among people?
So there's a process. Well, it's supposed to be a process. So when you come from the county jails, when you get to the county jails, there is an assessment done. However, everybody goes through mental health, medical, and so supposedly those records follow you. Now, what happens in between is another story, because you can go in with no disability and definitely develop one while you're there. But there is a process that when you come to get off the bus from the county into the upstate prison, there's a whole nother assessment done. It's a classification, your mental health level, your security level. All of those things are done when you first are in a women's prison. We call it RDOC, but it's basically intake. So if that is done correctly, then the determination on a person's mental illness status, if they have one, should be, up to par. But as I said, you develop things. People can develop disorders, and that's what people ignore. Just like I told you, I have intermittent explosive disorder that comes from trauma. I wasn't born with a mental illness. I developed one. So if the staff are doing their job, then it'll be an easier process.
So, and Natasha, and what you're saying is 100% correct. But
right, they ain't gonna do it.
Right. This is why we know that there's no good faith effort in corrections to correct anything, and that's why I'm saying, no, people don't like to hear the race card. They think it's overused, and I wouldn't be talking about race if race wasn't an issue. I would much rather we be talking about something else. And I got friends. Matter of fact, I'm probably the only person that's Black and white on this call. So I don't have the ability to be racist. But what I do have the ability to do is call it out when I see it. And I know I got a lot of allies on here that please don't be afraid to call it what it is and to stand up when we talk about it, because that's how you show solidarity. Because as long as people can walk around with blinders on and talk about this post-racial harmony that does not exist, then we're deluding ourselves. We're playing into their mental illness. Let me tell you something. This is the last thing I'm gonna say on this. Racism is a mental illness. If you can think just by the pigmentation of your skin that makes you better than anybody, smarter than anybody, or makes you superior to anybody, then you have got to have a mental illness, because pigmentation is biology. And that has nothing to do, and we all share the same biology, same mud, same blood.
Well, one last thing I'd like to say is, so the bill has been passed by both houses. It goes to the governor's office. We're going to be doing this rallying and all kinds of actions towards the governor. But Scott, if the governor refuses to sign the bill, I think Scott's actually on a call right now. I understand that.
So
If the,
if he
if the governor
refuses
refuses to sign the bill, what happens, Jerome?
what we're hoping to do is not get to there. But if he tries that, we have got confirmation from both houses that the 2/3 majority is willing to override a veto. Now, the caveat here is that he doesn't have to veto it. He can just try to sit on it. And we have pledges for them that if he tries to do that, that they're willing to make some bad press for him and some problems that I don't think he really wants to have on top of what he's got right now.
Right.
But we don't want to get to that because there's also the thing that they explained to us that there's some people from the supermajority he may be able to pick off that would lessen the numbers that we would have, because there's people looking for things that for years that he may be able to say, I'll give you that now if you do this. And you know, they're working for their constituencies, and I begrudge nobody looking out for theirs, because that's what we're doing with HALT, looking out for ours.
And I would say that, you know, the governor has been very strong during the whole COVID situation, pointing out again and again the trauma and the mental health issues. And so we appeal to him in that spirit to sign that law and set these people free, set people free from this torture.
He was the biggest champion of how bad the isolation and social distancing was. He did articles.
He was terrific on that. He was terrific.
Yeah, he blew himself up on that.
He did great.
But by the same time, he's willing to allow, by not signing this bill, people to be tortured to the nth degree. Because what we felt out here, I can tell you, I've been in both. What you felt out here with social distancing, quarantining, and COVID is nothing compared to what you feel in the solitary confinement cell. It is no comparison.
So I want to thank all of you, as I do all the time. Just being in your family, being in this community has been so meaningful. Probably the most meaningful campaign and community I've ever been a part of, honored to be a part of. I will see you on Sunday. We'll be outside the governor's mansion. We'll hope that he will sign this bill. So thank you, everybody, for being with us. The Cultural Competence Committee of NIAPRS, look for on the e-news. We'll be holding more events that as a follow-up to this with Jerome and Natasha and others. So please look for the e-news that'll say more about that. So thank you so much to all of you. Thank you so much. See you on Sunday.
See you Sunday.